investment world, what they look for in investing in when they look for an investment manager. I'm going to introduce you guys very shortly, but start with just a couple of organizational things. So there's one group of people left I still have to thank for this weekend, which is my family, Marion over there, Tommy, who may not be in the room, and Olivia. So it's a family. Everyone chips in and helps out, so thank you guys for helping. My elder daughter, Amelie, is at school in France this year, so she couldn't make it, but I'm sure she'll be back next year. Then also to Tillman, who I think has done a great job on the audio-visual. I've received very positive feedback from people on YouTube and stuff that it was much better this year, so thank you for that. But on that, on that same note, on the last discussion, a few people did say that at times it was a little bit quiet, so I'd much rather hear in the middle if someone is holding the microphone too far away or anything, just feel free to say immediately. It's not impolite. We'd want to make sure that everyone can hear. And then one final admin point. Next year, this event's going to be on the 16th and 17th of January, so please save the dates, and I hope as many of you as possible can make it. It's been really a great group, and I've really enjoyed the weekend. Okay, we get to the final session of the day, and I've got three panelists, all three new ones compared to prior years. And I'm going to ask each of you just to maybe quickly introduce yourselves and your organization. So Nick, maybe I can ask you to start if that's okay.
Hi, I'm Nick Sisko. I work with an organization called Trinity Wall Street. Trinity Wall Street is a church founded in Manhattan in 1697. And in 1705, the Queen of England gifted Trinity 215 acres. It'll get faster, I promise. Today, we retain 15 acres of land in Manhattan, mostly commercial real estate. We monetized a portion of that in 2015, brought on a team to manage a diversified part of the portfolio, and that's what we are. And philanthropically, because it's a wealthy church, it focuses on New York City primarily, with an emphasis on housing and homelessness and social justice.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Keep the microphone because we also want to hear a little bit about yourself. I know your background is very unconventional. You're a musician. Feel free to take your time just to say a few words about that.
I came to this role a little differently. I studied music all through school, and when I was finishing my doctorate at the Juilliard School, I decided I didn't want to...
Juilliard School being?
It's a conservatory for music in Manhattan, and I decided I didn't want to... I was studying composing, and I decided I wanted a different path, and it just so happened that I convinced the endowment at Juilliard to let me be their intern. And that's what started this. And to use the terminology of the week, that's where I got the bug. And I had symptoms before, and then it became very clear.
You still have a very strong connection to the music world through Emmy, your partner, who was here last year. Maybe a quick plug for Emmy and her.
Yes. If anybody would like to check out some really cool music that we put out on our record label, you can check out Emmy Ferguson, EMI Ferguson. And we have a Bach album out as of last year, and then the year before there was taking old French songs and popifying them. So it's a hopefully post-genre is the category we're going for, but there's a heavy emphasis on the classical.
Yeah, and we hope you bring Emmy back next year. She was here last year.
Yeah, we get some hits today. Maybe we can use that as a... Thank you for the plug.
Great. Hey, Matt, would you like to say a few words about Global Endowment and then introduce yourself? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Matt Leibel. I'm here from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm a member of the team at Global Endowment Management. We manage capital on behalf of about 36 primarily US-based universities and foundations. And so we're serving as their investment office. So we're what a lot of people would refer to as an outsourced chief investment office.
Yeah. And you have a fascinating background yourself, because I think you started on the endowment side, you dipped into the stock picking side with Pat Dorsey, and then came back to the endowment. So you've kind of straddled both those worlds. So maybe say a few words about that.
Yeah, so my first job out of school was actually with Global Endowment Management. And the sort of appeal of that role to me was I really didn't know where I thought I might fit in to the investing world. I was sort of fascinated by the idea of doing it, but got the opportunity to join what's a really great team there. And after 2.5 years, jumped at the opportunity to try my hand at direct investing. I'd sort of figured out that I like the idea of evaluating businesses and becoming a part owner in those businesses. And so I spent 4 years, or almost 4 years, working with Pat Dorsey in Chicago at Dorsey Asset Management. And then more recently jumped at the opportunity to come back to GEM and be a part of that team again.
Yeah. Yeah, because it was a topic with Nate that, you know, a lot of people are passionate about stock picking, but working at an endowment and in particular the mission element of that is also an important one. So you
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, it's was an amazing opportunity to work with the set of clients we have. And also, I think it's sort of an underrated opportunity for young people that may have this sort of concept of what investing is, to actually get to spend time with world-class investors across a lot of disciplines. And so that was sort of invaluable for me as a 22-year-old, to get to travel around the world and ask questions to people like Rob. Not everyone gets to do that. So.
That's great. So Johan, I'll pass you the microphone shortly, but yeah, feel free to keep hold of it there. So Johan, I only met you this weekend. I think we had a little bit of email contact and telephone calls beforehand, but you're a very, very rare species. That's why I wanted to I'm very happy you accepted my invitation to join this panel. So you're actually working with a European endowment. So maybe you can introduce the Novo Foundation to everyone, and then talk a bit about yourself as well.
Yes, okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I work for Novo Holding. We are the investment company of the Novo Foundation, which is a large Danish foundation. We have our heritage from Novo Nordisk, the company in Denmark. We own 25% of that. The company you mentioned was one of your mistakes. So we come from that company. We still own 25% of the company, and over time we have of course received dividends from that company. So now we've built an investable pool of money, where that's what the area I work with, and we have. You see, the strategy is we have 50% of the money is actually invested in life science, coming from the heritage from life science, but the other 50% are in financial investments, which are more like broad in asset classes and equity or credit and bonds, where I is very much focused on the manager side. We also do a fair amount of direct investments, and also it's both managers in the equity, on credit, and it's more sort of approach where we are very much looking for managers with a very fundamental approach, very long-term, very concentrated, and a strong alignment of interest from managers who have all the money invested alongside. So not much different from what we heard from MIT, actually, in forms of approach, very much focused on what's going on underlying, on trying to underwrite underlying companies and trying to be a good partner for the managers.
Yeah, maybe 1 or 2 words about yours.
Yeah, I've been in the company for now 11 years, so a long time. And when I started, we were 2 guys on the team. Now we are 4 or 5, and we have grown a lot in assets. Also, mostly because of the dividends we received from Novo Nordisk over time, but also we made a little bit of a return on the way. We have over time we have built a portfolio of trying to build these long-term relationships, and we've done this. We've been with some of the managers for almost 10, 11 years, many of them now. So also fun going around meeting and talking to a lot of interesting investors. That's the fun part, and talking about companies. I like that as well. So I have a passion for investment always.
Yeah. And were you just across, were you always at Novo, or were you at other stations beforehand?
Yeah, I worked before Novo. I was actually in a startup, in a hedge fund of fund startup for a few years, and that was also quite interesting during the financial crisis. You learned a lot. I think Nate was also talked about some of the facts about learning from hedge funds and mistakes there, and what worked and didn't work in investment. So that was quite interesting times. And you also learned that one learning I had was try to keep things quite simple, and basically long only, non-leveraged investments. Long-term focus is it's probably a smart way to invest longer term than trying a lot of other things. So that's why before that I was in some private banking, work with high net worth individuals, also fund selection, asset allocation, and before that was from business school, and in Copenhagen Business School financing. Yeah.
Okay.
So
super. I have to say, Novo doubled over the time I held it. So although it was a mistake, there's definitely worse ones out there.
Yeah. You're right about the pricing. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
No, I enjoyed the association with the people there. They were really great people, and the business has continued to do very well since I saw it. So, I mean, I really have no complaints about that company, and it's clearly served your endowment very well as well. Okay. So maybe as well, just before we go to Q&A, I'm sure a question everyone wants to ask in any case is, kind of what your mental model is in terms of what you look for in managers. Maybe you could just say a few words about that, and then we'll go to Q&A from the audience.
Like Nate, and I mean, most people idealize looking just for finding the best in breed or the best in class or the best athletes. I think the one nuance for the group that I'm work with for Trinity is, given that we're a smaller team, we're generalists, but we
How big's the team?
On the investment side, 3 senior, 2 analysts, and on the real estate side, 2 people. And so the endowment's split roughly half and half of the assets, so it's a little bit of a scramble. Yeah. And so there's always looking for the best athletes, but I don't know if we have the same capacity to scout around the world in the same way. So it's aspirational to get there.
I'm a fan of small teams, so.
At Global Endowment, you're going to hear a lot of the same themes that have come up throughout the weekend. We're ultimately also sort of very bottom-up focused, and one of the things that we really focus on is trying to identify people that have selected into a strategy that really fits sort of all aspects of their life, I guess. And so I think it takes a very different person to run a long-short portfolio that has maybe 50 positions in total than someone that's doing something like Andreas, who we just heard from, with 6 positions. And so you really need someone that has a different mindset and focus. And so we spend a lot of time on that aspect.
Johan?
Yeah. Yes, what we focus on, I think I mentioned a little bit, but I think one thing is, of course, there's a lot of smart people out there, and what we really focus on, we don't want to change anybody. We want to find people who kind of do what fits them very well, kind of, so we never change any manager. And we really want something all have their different, you can see, biases and styles and way to do it, but they're all kind of fundamental based, and they all drive, we say, we want to find who really have a great passion for investment. That's one of the important things we really look for. And so of course, also other things that's of course important, as you all know, but so we will never compromise any ethical standards. That's also very, very important, I think. And you want to feel that they are passionate, but still have maybe the one thing you can say, still having a strong drive to want to deliver at the same time. So that's some of the things we're really trying to. So it's very qualitative things, but it's I think we're trying to assess when both of the existing manager and new manager we're looking for, and new relation we're trying to build. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So let me now pass over the microphone, and hopefully there's lots of questions from the audience.
Who's first?
So I would like to understand with how many emerging managers do you work, and what is the typical process of engagement with each of them? How do you seed them? If you continue adding, if you put a lot first? I would like to understand this.
Thank you. I always first. Is that what's going on?
I can start.
Why don't you just mix things up a bit when you go first?
Sure. So Global Endowment does invest with emerging managers. Similar to what you heard from Nate this morning, there's not an explicit mandate to do it, but we find it to be sort of a very valuable part of our process. And I work on the public investing team. We do work across teams some, but most of my focus is there. And we have a little over 30 managers that we're invested with across public. And depending on how you define emerging, they're a subset of that. They would be in the minority, but it's something we're always looking to do. And really, I think even if we didn't explicitly invest with emerging managers, it would make a lot of sense to spend time with those people as they sort of mature through their careers. It's very rare that we'll invest with someone that we haven't spent multiple years getting to knowing and engaging with. And so, yeah, it's core to what we do to spend time with people sort of throughout their investment life.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a quite concentrated portfolio. I think we have 10 or 11 manager relationships on the equity side and a few on the credit side, maybe 5. So it's concentrated, but we also spend time meeting emerging managers and try to get to know everybody basically and follow them for years. And we also have seeded managers, and we are in process of seeding another one. So we have done that now. We will up seeding through 3 managers thing over time, and some of them, most of them have had somewhat experience from previous times, had some kind of track record. We also seeded some that had no track record. You could say in terms of a return track record. But then we had sometimes started up with them in a way where we kind of re-underwritten the deals with them. And so we had them kind of on our own balance sheet for a period of time and really, done the deals together with them to get to know them. And then we kind of, when they've done a few deals and it worked fine, and we really got a great impression about their process and their analytical skills, and got to know them even better, which is important. We have kind of branched into doing a kind of a mandate with them or a managed account. So that's one thing we have done. That's a credit investment. So, but on the equity side also, we are meeting many new managers, and I think it's important to, if you can be comfortable, to get in early, and you can maybe get a special deal. But it's we are looking at it, but it's an evolving process. We don't have, as you had, a emerging manager program per se, but definitely something we're considering increasingly looking at to, if we find talent, to get in early.
Given the size of our staff, we have a random number, which is 40, and that's the number of relationships we're shooting for across public, private, credit, and equity. And that's arbitrary number, but the concept is that we need to understand our partners, and we need to understand them such that we can support them when things go wrong. And so in the broader institutional investor world, for lots of reasons I'm happy to rant about, basically we all know that we should buy low and sell high, but there's a pervasive behavior of basically selling low and buying high. And so you'd wonder why I'm talking about emerging managers, but what I'm saying is that, so when you start with, say, I only have a few slots, for lack of a better word, and it's not because they're going to be varying sizes of commitment, but at the same time, a relationship is a relationship, and you can back someone whether they're 1% of your portfolio, basis points, or 10%. So the weight of that is there, and so like Matt, I think like everyone, we really want to spend time with these individuals to get to know them, and so there's no blanket statement about we do or do not do emerging managers. We've been there day one. We've invested with people later on in their investment track or career. But I do often struggle with this concept of track record, and I know it's very important, and I'm not diminishing it. But just because you have something attributable to someone or not attributable, talking to them, spending time with them, and understanding them should have more weight, in my opinion. Because we have all these people that spend time with numbers, and a lot of times, a 3-year track record tells you whether you can invest, which is a kind of a consultant's, 3-year track, and now we can go. I mean, how is that enough data points to tell you anything? I mean, maybe that combined with getting to know the person and understanding how the investments worked out, but these blanket rules are just dangerous. And so I'll stop ranting, but I think everyone
awesome.
should be open.
Yeah. Thank you. I just realized we don't have anyone in the hot seat checking out the internet for questions. So Dennis, just because you're closest there, do you mind taking a seat? And if you see anything interesting coming through, wave to me, and I'll give you a few minutes to collect your thoughts, and I might come back to you a bit later. It's dangerous where you stand at this meeting. Yeah, there's another question here up the front.
So this is more about portfolios and not the emerging managers, but what Nate said to me really resonated, and I've read this about MIT and some others, just putting together really good managers into a portfolio and then monitoring the exposures. But it sounds like you guys are all on the public side. How do you think about that in terms of, you want to find best in breed, you've got to assemble a portfolio. How much attention do you pay to an overall benchmark? How much do you get away from that, or try not to think about it, or allow yourselves freedom, I guess, as you construct this portfolio of really good managers, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
You go first.
Sure. Global Endowment, we very much ascribe to sort of all of the sourcing and selection is done bottom up, but then there are top down guardrails that we use basically to try to put ourselves in the best position to deliver the returns necessary to support our clients. And so for the equity exposure, which is the sort of dominant exposure at Global Endowment, we use ACWI as sort of a starting point for where those guardrails are. But if you think about it at like a country level, we've had as much as sort of like a low double-digit swing away at a country level. So if you think the U.S. is 55%, we've at points been below 45% there. So we're willing to sort of tolerate fairly wide swings if we think that's where we're sort of identifying opportunity at any given time. But that's probably the part of the process that's most collaborative across the firm. And so there's sort of constant conversations going on between our team with our CIO and even with our managers, and sort of understanding. So since we're very bottom up, and if we end up with a large overweight, an example from this year would have been in the UK, that's very interesting to try and understand and talk about why people that can invest globally have decided to gravitate there. And so that's another just sort of opportunity for us to learn and understand.
Sure. I think it's really hard because there's the idealized portfolio, like what you would do with your own money, and then there's the institutionalized portfolio. Not to keep picking on Nate, but since he's the topic of the day, in my mind,
Poor Nate.
I don't obviously work at MIT, but in a lot of ways they have a very much idealized setup, such that their governance allows the investment professionals to do, in my opinion, what I think they want to do. And a lot of institutions actually have a little bit of a different dynamic, whereby you are constantly reporting to an ever-evolving and changing board. And not that MIT doesn't have a board or that they're not engaged. It's just that level, the degrees of freedom come with building a track record and establishing trust. And so with that comes, I think, the freedom to take risks against kind of a benchmark or what you'll be judged against over time. And it's kind of an interesting feedback loop, because you need to get to that escape velocity to actually be able to take the risks you want to take and actually tilt in directions or have the portfolio you would want to have if it were your own money. So, I mean, that's just one extra thought.
Yeah, I think that's great. You pass on the microphone, but I think that's great credit to Seth. I mean, it's not because they have a particular governance structure at MIT, it's because he's built that culture of trust to the board with his employees, and he's kind of earned that freedom as opposed to it being somehow structured into the endowment. Yeah. Johan.
But further to your point, I think we were lucky in the beginning, actually, in our company, that we were not very institutionalized. So we can actually kind of build a strategy that was more like how you want to invest your own money to a degree, which we had this fundamental, very concentrated approach. That's probably more difficult when you came from a larger pension fund. We have risk measured and track and error measured and all that stuff. So we've been lucky in that way to be able to kind of go invest with people in a concentrated way, which we believe is the long-term best way to invest. And to the question about the portfolio construction, we spent a lot of time, and that was also one of the things when I joined the company. I really liked that we could do everything. For example, in managed accounts, most of it, or 99% of what we have on the equity side, and then we really look through how does what portfolio look, and we spend a lot of time. That's why we don't have too many managers. We want to be extremely have a high, what you call active share, or something that doesn't look like the benchmark. We spend a lot of time on that. So that's part of the process, really, to try to not to just try to look different for looking different, but building a portfolio that have a chance from outperforming. And of course, we also need to look at diversification. But our portfolio starts bottom up, and sometimes we end with some biases. But still, we spend a lot of time constructing a portfolio that looks very different from the benchmark. Whereas we just buy the benchmark. That's for free. So we spend time looking through all our positions.
That's great. I think, Dennis, you've got a question from the internet?
Gentlemen, we have a question from the internet, and I also have a question myself, if it's okay if I...
That's cheating.
The question from the internet is, I'm curious, to what extent do you rely on external consultants in manager selection and due diligence?
None at all. So I
Same. No.
same, but I'd just add that not to disparage consultants or governance, but if you don't trust your team, I don't understand. I mean, it's just it's a safety blanket. And in some cases, it can make a lot of sense. And if it's an area you're not comfortable, adding a consultant could be a wonderful concept as you build that competency or comfort. But the concept of always having a consultant to verify what the team's work is doing means you should probably just have a different team or a different governance structure or trust. And so back to where I guess is how do you get to that trust? Because that extra layer is just more opinions, and you're solving for all the equations. You're not solving for what you want, you're solving for what you can get through the consultant, what you can get through the board, and then that your whole lens and aperture of how you invest gets affected by what can I actually get done. Because you are trying to take your portfolio from point A to point B with that constraint.
Yeah, just to add to that, I don't think we are very aligned with the consultant in general, because they probably want to find some managers where they can invest a lot of money and sell to a lot of different investors, and we probably want to invest with somebody who are very bad at selling their products, so don't get too many investors and limit the AUM. So I don't think we are aligned, and we'll look for the same opportunities anyway. Yeah.
That's good.
Still a total no.
Dennis, I appreciate your chutzpah, so go for it.
I'm curious, just while we have you up here, just some perspectives on portfolio construction at the institutional investor level. Do you have heuristics or mental models? I think I'm a stock picker. I run a very concentrated fund, and I'm always trying to learn from other sophisticated investors about how you think about sizing and portfolio construction, and particularly because sizing a manager is very unique, and there's all different types of styles and underlying portfolio construction. Just curious if you have any mental models or heuristics.
I don't think we have any kind of sophisticated models for that. As I mentioned before, we don't. Each of our managers doesn't have to be diversified. We have a diversified portfolio by putting these kind of idiosyncratic portfolios together. That's it. But there's no kind of. Of course, we look through it. Are there any major positions, and then we'll have to scale. So we have some risk limits, but they are kind of. I think they're very simple, like maximum 5 to 10% in one position or something like very, very simple rules. And we also, of course, look into the benchmark. Are we completely 45% in IT or 30% in Asia? We'll probably adjust some, but that's it, I would say. We very much believe in that the portfolio should be driven from the bottom up of the best opportunities. Yeah. So there's no, I don't have any kind of special model heuristics, but that's simple. I think we do it. Yeah.
One comment I would make on portfolio construction and specifically on concentration, I think it's something that actually gets confused a bit within the world of value investing that we all work within. And I sometimes scratch my head a little bit when people say like a core part of their strategy is concentration. I think concentration in the perfect world is more of an output than an input. And the reason why I think a lot of great investors end up being concentrated is because it's really hard to find good ideas. And in a perfect world, if everyone could have 100 or 1,000 positions and all of them compounded nicely, smoothed out the returns, that would ultimately be better, but reality sort of constrains that. And so I think that's an important point, and there are some strategies that are more suited to running in a more diversified way. And so at the end of the day, we don't hunt specifically for concentration. If someone can run a strategy with 25 stocks and deliver good outcomes, that's great also.
And it has to fit the personality of the manager, a point you made as well. Yeah.
I mean, I would just add that a lot of institutions, by the scale of their assets, can't be as concentrated as they'd like, and so it creates a different model and a different level of complexity. Because if you want to have these really bespoke, unique, great managers, they often are capacity constrained, and so you end up having kind of a proliferation of line items, which makes it harder to do the job.
Okay, and there's a question at the front here. I noticed it's 12 o'clock, but we were a little bit late starting, so I might let it overrun about 10 minutes if that's okay with everybody. Yeah. Okay.
So for buying a stock, and generally stocks do not have feelings, you can sell them very easily. Uh, it's generally when I spend time on them before I'm planning to buy them. I always think of like when you try to sell, how much kind of difficult it would be, because the more you know, the more you kind of fall in love with the stock, like it's doing very nice thing for the world and so on and so forth. And I think for managers, it is going to be much more difficult because there are feelings involved. You spent a lot of time knowing them. Um, Tell us a bit about how you make the sell or reduce decision on a manager. Like how does that happen, and how do you tell them? And like if you don't completely want to sell them, just reduce because you have like too much in IT and so on and so forth. How would that conversation go, and how would you kind of make sure that they understand that you're not getting rid of them in like 2 years, but basically just reducing because it doesn't fit your current portfolio? Thank you.
Oh man, I have to start this one. I think it's really hard because you're further away from the portfolio than the manager. And so when things aren't going well, it's your job always to be in as well equipped as possible to understand what's going on and the positions. But when things don't go well, there's a natural tendency to want to sell. Back to my selling low and buying high. And then you trade out of that and you go buy the manager that's just done well. So if there's mean reversion, if that's the type of thing that could happen in a strategy, it's you want to always consider that. So it's ignore like figuring out the right time to buy and sell a manager if you're going to be in that game. But in terms of figuring out when you should move on, assuming you made your right decision and that this is a really thoughtful investor, it's either going to be something on the business side where they've allowed themselves to grow out of their wheelhouse or can no longer invest the way they used to. Maybe they're getting distracted because they have a lot of commas next to their name. And maybe they're just proliferating products. But that conversation on trimming and adding is, as long as you have a good relationship, it shouldn't be too difficult. And then sometimes there's portfolio considerations. So we're growing our private portfolio because we're a new institution, and over time that will be fed out of the public equity portfolio. Fortunately, we're journalists, so we get to look at it and compare and contrast. But it's never easy, and it's always kind of you're further away from the action, if you will, and so you want to really understand what you invested in, and you invested in a person to invest on your behalf. And so you're underwriting that person and how they behave, and then hopefully you support how they think. But if you disagree on a position, or the outcome of an investment, it shouldn't necessarily be the thing that's end all and be all. But if they're clear signs that they're not doing their work or they're distracted, then I think it might be time to move on. But I will stop and pass.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the hard parts of the job. Managers definitely have feelings. We have feelings. And so I think it's part of the reason why the sort of preliminary process before we make an investment is so long. Oftentimes that we really need to build a high degree of confidence that this is a decision that we want to make for at least a long enough period of time that we've seen investments that are made play out on a time horizon that's appropriate, because it's really only at that point that you can begin. There are some signposts that you're looking at more frequently. I think some of the things that Nick just talked about, but really on the underlying investment level, you need a significant amount of time. And then when we do get in situations where we need to make those hard decisions to either reduce a position or to exit a manager, I think the most important thing there is just being very clear in the communication, both internally within our team and then externally. So internally, I think one of the things that we try to do to avoid the sort of emotions that come in to the very difficult decision is trying to just lay out all the facts. And so we'll have had dozens of interactions by that point with managers. Typically, we can look at all the things that they've told us over time. We can look at how the underlying companies are performing and how things are playing out there. And we try to be very objective in thinking about what's occurred there. And then when we go to have the conversation with the manager, if the decision is to reduce or to exit, we can sort of lay that information out there in a very sort of clear way. And that's typically helpful. Doesn't make it easier, but it's usually better.
Yeah. It's definitely difficult also because you talked about yesterday management. There was a likable factor, and that also goes with many. I think most of the managers we kind of like as persons always, so that makes it more difficult. I think there's difference between sometimes you have good argument for reducing, if you just say you need the money for somebody. We have I would say something we need money for something else, for grant giving or for other big investments. You have good argument for reducing. But in terms of exit and manage completely, you actually like as a person, I think that's difficult, and it have to be made of some. And we are very patient in general, and we give people a very long time to show themselves. But we have fired managers, and obviously now I'm thinking back, what's been the reason? And every time it's been that we actually go quite deep on some of the individual investment decisions over time, and we say the way they've underwritten this company, the analysis they've done is not good enough, and we've done that. That's a few. We see over time it's really been down to this company they're buying. It doesn't make sense their process. So and that's been the argument. That's of course hard to tell them. We tell them because we don't think you're doing a good job investment-wise, and we have made a mistake up front. And that's what we're looking at day to day. And but it's a hard process. But that's what we focused on. That's the underlying positions, and the underlying analysis is the quality of that. It's not as expected basically, but it's not making it more easy. But yeah.
Is it, maybe just one of you answer this just in the interest of time, but is it ever the case the initial decision is made based on investing in a particular manager and his or her ability, but over time the organization grows so large that actually the original decision is no longer valid because it's effectively someone else managing the portfolio? Is that something that comes up, or do you want to go for that?
Sorry, do you mean someone else managing the institution's portfolio or the manager's portfolio?
Yeah, so effectively they become a manager of a company as opposed to an investment manager.
Team
Yeah.
incorporates to-
Which team, sorry?
Of the manager.
Matt, why don't you go
Yes.
for it?
Sorry.
I get it
now. We've certainly encountered that in some cases, and I think it goes back a little bit to the underlying strategy, and we spend a lot of time, especially with emerging managers, trying to understand where they think the firm is headed, because I think one underappreciated aspect of starting an investment organization, even if you're a single person managing it, you are managing a business as well as an investment portfolio. And so people that move on to hire a team, especially as teams grow larger, if you have 5 or 6 analysts working for you, it's hard to imagine how you could really have direct relationships with every analyst on everything they're working on. And so you really have to transition into more of a role of where you're a manager of those people and calibrating your decisions based off of what they're doing. So I think we've done a pretty good job of avoiding making decisions where we're invested with someone because we think they're the person that's the key driver of all of the analysis, and then they've gone and hired a team. But we have run into issues where firms evolve and change in terms of how they're structured and how they work, and that can be problematic.
Okay, I think there was a question up the back there.
Thanks for taking my question, Rob. My question is, for potential emerging managers in the world, what are some things, tangible steps that they can do ahead of time to maximize their chance of success?
Be yourself and get lucky. Seriously, I mean, whether people find you, if you're that emerging manager or not, is, as far as I can tell, wildly random, unless you start to cater yourself to all the needs of the people you know that are investing. And then there's a whole other group that wants something else. And then pretty soon you've built something that's not yours. And so I hate to say if you build it, they will come. But sometimes that's true. And sometimes it's not true. But if that's the case and you built the business right, you probably made a lot of money. Just not as much money as you would have made if you had institutional clients alongside. Anybody have something more brilliant? Sorry.
No, I agree in a lot of ways. I think the point around sort of having a vision for what you're trying to build is important, but I don't think a vision needs to be all constraining in terms of the way you invest or the way you manage your business. It's important, and I think we've heard from a lot of people today, if you look at them through their investment careers, they've really sort of wildly evolved in a lot of ways. And structuring sort of your vision in a way that still allows you to do that is important. And we're oftentimes looking for emerging managers that, even if they don't have a track record of doing that in their investment portfolio, that can show sort of ways they've evolved and figured out ways to solve problems in other parts of their life. And so, and so much as you can demonstrate sort of a track record of doing that outside of investing, I think that's an interesting thing maybe to try and highlight.
Yeah, I say all managers, they involve the manager I've seen who has started their company, they involve maybe some go from being, let's say, they go for a period of time, they are more diversified, become more concentrated. I've seen that many times. They get more confident in both. They're also in the beginning they cater a lot to their investors and want to kind of accommodate all what they say, and then they get confident to do their own thing. That's an evolving process. But I think you have to be you have to just be very transparent about that process and tell that's how we've evolved and that's how it is, and we made those and those mistakes, and that's the normal thing, and just start early and make your mistakes, and and that's about the thing.
And I'm sorry to do this because I know everyone wants to ski, but I think that one of the things we stop doing is assuming and hoping that our established managers or people with experience themselves continue to grow and learn and evolve. And it's kind of funny. We just assume that you're going to pay your tuition on a seed early stage manager. You pay your tuition, established manager, and I just that may be the wrong mental framework. And the conversation often should be more about how has manager X, Y, or Z improved over the last decade. We partner with them, and it may not be visible, but hopefully you can at least find some signs.
Yeah, but it's just that you want them to evolve. That's important.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
they don't, they're not going to stay relevant. They have to change to some degree about the circle of competence, the diversification, whatever, evolve and learn all the day, and be passionate about and motivated for learning all the time. I think that's an important thing to focus on. Yeah.
I think the question was what to do before kind of starting, and I would say from an investing side, the most important thing to do is manage your own money. That's the only way to learn about investing, is to actually invest. So if you're at a company which forbids that, and I know a lot of funds do, then you really need to change firms. And in terms of building the business side, I think the most important advice is just to give yourself a really long runway, because no one is, if you're starting out as an unknown quantity like I did, no one's going to invest with you probably in the first couple of years or whatever, but over time kind of word gets out. And so I probably didn't have a whole lot of people reaching out to me in the first 5 years, but at some point people did start reaching out to me. So you just need to give yourself time. It's not something that can be done in the first sort of 6 months. Yeah.
Consistently writing is also very helpful, because that's something where you're really cementing your thoughts and sharing them with people outside. And so I know most people write investment letters, and I don't think you need to write them monthly or weekly, like we see some people early on. Probably not going to have original insights that frequently, but whether it's annually or semi-annually or quarterly, that's a great way to sort of show people you're learning and investing.
Those are all amazing. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, I think it's 1:15 now, so unless there's a really burning question in the room, I think it might be time to thank the panelists. And thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you next year.